has been a reoccurring phenomenon in the Nintendo community to accuse Nintendo of not producing new IPs, not doing enough things with old IPs, letting creativity stifle, That's been a big cope for a long time now. And yet, when you look at the numbers, when you look at the statistics, when you look at what Nintendo actually puts out, what you actually find is that Nintendo actually experiments more and creates more new IPs than any other company in the industry. Case in point, Chibi Robo, released in 2006 on the Nintendo GameCube. Over the years, Chibi Robo has gotten a reputation for being a massively overlooked hidden gem on Nintendo GameCube. And upon playing it, I instantly found myself wondering why. Because I remember when Chibi Robo came out. I remember seeing it on the store shelf. I remember it being sold for $15. I remember looking on the back. I remember Nintendo Power trying to sell me on this game being some massively overlooked thing. And every time I thought about it, I found myself having no interest in it at all. The idea of being a robot, going around and doing chores for people, seemed laughably far off from what I wanted to do in video games. I began to become more entranced with more niche RPGs. At the time I was playing games like Baten Kaitos Origins. A couple of years later, I would discover Fire Emblem. Right? Chibi Robo was something that I did not overlook. It was something that I chose not to play because it didn't look interesting to me in any way, shape, or form. In fact, another GameCube hidden gem that I couldn't pick up at the time, Killer 7, is something that I went back to years later and not only loved, but ended up influencing this very channel. If it wasn't for other Nintendo YouTubers insisting that this game was a masterpiece, that it was something spectacular, that this was like a classic Nintendo game, I never would have checked it out. And now that I have, I can safely say that I was right. This game is nothing special. It's not all that interesting, creative, original, fresh, funny. It is just a generic adventure game at its core. It reminds me a lot of how people would hype up Earthbound back in the day as being some monumental, life-changing RPG that just was vastly overlooked by the audiences at the time because of a marketing campaign or because of how it looked primitive and not all that fun to play. When in reality, Earthbound is essentially just a knockoff Dragon Quest. Earthbound did not just fail because of a bad, misplaced advertising campaign, or because it was overpriced, or because it was on the Super Nintendo, or because the audience just didn't get into it. No, Earthbound didn't do well because at its core, it could not compete with other major RPGs at the time. And I think it's safe to say that Chibi Robo, being a story-based adventure game, could not compete with other games in the genre at the time. Now, as a bit of a disclaimer here, I am not an adventure game fan. I did not grow up playing a lot of them on console or on PC. I don't really know a lot about the history of the genre or like what's actually out there, but I can tell you as like an amateur, someone who's like dabbled in this kind of thing over the years, I do feel as if like the PC is the definitive adventure game format because PC gaming was able to incorporate voice acting. It was able to feature full animations. It was able to be relatively lengthy, complex adventure games that you weren't really seeing on console. So I think that being a more story-focused format, something that relies more on animation, more on voice acting, more on story work, like, giving off complex character ideas and animations, like this format inherently works better on PC. So when I look at Chibi Robo and I see a story-based simulation game with very little actual gameplay to it, I can't help but feel that there have to be better alternatives to this stuff out there on other platforms. It's sort of like how Nintendo continued to produce RPGs after Squaresoft left them in the 90s, even though they weren't nearly as good as what Squaresoft was doing at the time. Games like Golden Sun are essentially just cheap derivative knockoffs of Dragon Quest. It's often said that Nintendo doesn't care about stories or that they try and keep stories away from their games, but that's not really true. They've experimented with this kind of thing in the past. They've done it before with new IPs outside of their pre-established major franchises, but in a lot of cases, what they've found is that people either don't care for the story and wish there was more gameplay in it, or the story envelops the entire thing and kind of overshadows everything they try to do creatively with the actual gameplay. Chibi Robo is, I think, a very good example of this issue in which it does have a story, it does have shockingly complex characters, it does have an interesting setting, an interesting setup, a unique premise, but at the end of the day, what you end up doing is walking around a house and cleaning up mud and picking up trash. That's it. You have to engage with the game's systems to uncover just what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to progress. And in a lot of cases, it is very convoluted and annoying. To a lot of people, this is, typical video game nonsense, but I feel as if the game itself simply isn't complex enough to suit its narrative, right? This is supposed to be a story about a dysfunctional family finding solace in each other. It's supposed to be about them becoming close, and it's supposed to be about them overcoming their personal issues. But in a lot of ways, all that really happens is that the little robot goes around and does things for them, and a lot of underlying issues regarding the family and what they're doing remain completely unresolved. In fact, I was kind of appalled by the ending to this game, in which the robot is rewarded for all of his actions and all the good he's done throughout the adventure, and yet, it really almost feels as if the human characters don't really matter at all. It just kind of feels like they're there, that they're props to be just on display, like you're going through an amusement park ride. The explanations you get for the plot and the characters for acting the way they are, they're very well thought out, and they seem like they could potentially work. But because of the game's pacing, because of how little actually happens in the plot, what you end up with is something that feels relatively contrived and ridiculous. It just feels as if they really needed to spend more time just introduce more mechanics, interacting with the family, getting to know them, getting to understand their nuances and their quirks, and slowly introducing the ideas that it wanted to build up to. But as it so happens, in the actual plot, a lot of the things that happen just come out of thin air. They feel kind of contrived. They feel kind of forced. They feel like they're going from point A to point B, and that's not how you write a story. One of the aspects of Chibi Robo that a lot of people talk about is the fact that the toys are alive. The idea that, when the humans aren't around, the toys are out running around doing their own thing. And that's just the way things are in this house, right? You get an explanation for this immediately at the end, but it doesn't really amount to anything, and it doesn't really change the way you view the setting or the characters. And that's kind of my perspective on looking at this game. What exactly do the toys being alive contribute to the actual plot? Now, the toys are fun. They have fun designs. They have fun gimmicks. There's a shocking amount of them. They're hidden all over the house, right? There's there's all these like interesting, engaging, fun things about them. But at the same time, they don't contribute to the actual plot. And if anything, they kind of distract you from like the core aspect of what's going on with like the family dysfunction and their personal issues and stuff like that. Like, for me, I felt like cutting out the toys entirely and making the plot entirely about the family, having them be in more places, do more things, show more sides of their personality, interact with them more, become close to them, have them all have their own individual plot lines that you have to resolve by the end, right? The game is just weirdly railroaded in this respect because there are all these side quests that don't have anything to do with the main quest that just don't really go anywhere. Like, at the end of the main storyline, like, I'm not even sure why the daughter talks like a frog. Because of all the side quests, because of the way the game is structured, because of all the things you can do, all the detours you can take, all the different characters you can meet, all the content you can miss, all the clues and the hints you can bypass, all that leads to the game feeling kind of unfocused and you not really feeling any true attachment to any of the characters. A really good example I found was the daughter, Jenny, has this stuffed bear that she carries around with her everywhere, right? And the bear is like her best friend and her companion, and it's alive, right? So I am playing this game, I'm going through this game, and I'm noticing that the bear is sometimes nowhere to be found. I have no idea where it is. But sometimes, it shows up, it talks to you, it gives you some hints about what Jenny's up to and what she's doing, whatever. Right. And then about 8-10 hours in, I find it in her room. And all of a sudden it's telling me that it's never seen me before. And this is our first meeting. And this wasn't true in my playthrough because I had met and spoken to this bear several times over the past several hours. The game did not account for how I was experiencing it. And so this confusing meeting with the bear just made me feel as if this game wasn't very well thought out as a story, as an experience. Chibi Robo is a game, to me, that feels like it was too ambitious for its scope. This is a game that wanted to tell this story about this dysfunctional family in this household and threw in all this nonsense that didn't need to be there. Stuff that's so ridiculous, it's honestly kind of impossible for me to take it seriously. Now, are there good things about the game? Absolutely. You can really get into the bits that work, the creativity. I really love the idea of having a little robot running around doing chores for me. Right? There's fun, engaging things about Chibi Robo. And I do think this does need to be explained a lot for Chibi Robo fans out there. This was a niche title. Okay, this is a title that didn't really take off, that didn't go anywhere, that didn't become successful, and inherently it's because it's just not that appealing to people. It's fine to enjoy things like this for what they are, but you do have to face facts that the Chibi Robo IP didn't go anywhere. The character is just not that appealing to people. There's nothing about this concept that hasn't been done elsewhere. There were so many times when I was playing this game where I'm just kind of like, oh, that's kind of like Toy Story. This is kind of like a, Spy Family. I was coming up with all these comparisons to media that are better than this, that are far more successful and iconic culturally speaking, right? What does Chibi Robo do that its contemporaries don't? Is my question. And a lot of people have this mindset that Chibi Robo needs to come back and it needs to be successful and it needs to be exactly like the first game and Nintendo needs to market it properly and they need to make it not a Walmart exclusive this time. They need to put it outside of Japan and that would make it successful. But you can tell these people don't have any business experience at all because that wouldn't work. If anything, looking at this series and its legacy and what the first game actually is, I'm kind of shocked that Chibi Robo got as many chances as it did. Definitely, I'm sure the creators did have a vision for what they wanted the series to be. but it just didn't pan out. And it does need to be understood that when things don't work, you do have to acknowledge that they don't work. And in Chibi Robo's case, I think the core gameplay, the core issue between the game itself and the story it wants to tell is something that like the IP fundamentally cannot get away from. For me, playing this game for the first time makes me feel as if the people who hyped this game up as a classic like simply grew up with it with no real perspective on what's actually out there and what they can experience on Nintendo and even other platforms, right? This isn't something that really sticks out to me as some spectacular experience. This is just a video game with a lot of charm to it, a lot of heart to it, but at the same time doesn't really stand out as one of the all-time greats. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know, I'm happy that like Nintendo gave this game a shot and produced it, and I'm glad it exists. You know, like it's a good thing that they experiment with things like this. But as consumers, it is our responsibility to kind of acknowledge that a lot of these ideas don't work. And we do need to address that if we're going to help Nintendo produce better games that better appeal to players. And I think simply selling Chibi Robo as like, oh, it's good because it's different. It just it's not doing the developers any favors at all by just overselling this IP based on this hipster idea that we have to support this thing because it's not very popular.